No quiz today?
Wishful thinking, but you got it. There's no quiz today.
Yeah. I should have done the
See,
reading.
for those of you who are visiting, this is an enigma. Students pay good money to come here and learn, and then when we don't make them learn, hold them accountable, they rejoice. Never figured that out. Z, okay, heading to Peru on deputation for Peru, right? And what kind of ministry will your family be involved in specifically? Church planting or?
No, he'll be teaching at a college there, training pastors. So
Is that Trujillo or?
it's in Trujillo, yeah.
Okay. Seminary in Trujillo.
All right. Full name is Zacharias?
Zechariah.
Zechariah, but you like Z.
Yeah.
All right, good. All right, good. And Brother Sean was in prayer band last night, and he was at conference last year as well. And he is representing Adelphos and USA ministry. And I'm going to give you a chance to say a couple words too, okay? Steve Anderson, mid-missions, and he's going to say a few words, and he has to slip out to do some setup over there. So I told him he could go ahead right at the beginning.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm our administrator for all of our North American, Asian, and South Pacific ministries with Baptist Missions. One of the things that we've put together in this past year is a partnership with Faith. You guys may have heard about this already. I assume you've heard about it. I mentioned it when I was here for Missions Conference. And that is a paid internship opportunity for students needing to complete their academic internships. So if you complete your academic internship requirements for graduation with one of our North American ministry teams, there's a $1,500 payment that'll be made against your school bill on your behalf. So it's paid in that way, so there's no tax liability for you, so you get the full benefit, but it's paid against either your last semester if you're graduating or your next semester if you are in between your junior and senior year doing that internship. So the brochures outline the internships that are available, with the exception of one that was added after this was printed, and that's an internship with Jason Ormiston up in Minneapolis at Family Baptist Church. He has one more slot available, at least one more slot available for this coming summer. We have one student already from school here that's headed that way. And so Jason, I hired Jason a few months ago to be my director for church planting and development. So he is dealing with our church planting team, not dealing with, but directing. Maybe directing our church planting initiatives and some of our revitalization efforts. And so if you're interested in that, contact info is on the back of that brochure. You can get a hold of me. But basically, it's real simple. If you need an internship this coming summer and you want to get the benefit of having it paid against your school bill when you complete that 6 to 8 week internship, whatever the requirement is, we'd love to have you do it with one of our North American ministry teams. So there's church planting involvement here. There's inner city ministry. There's rural ministry. There's camp ministry. It's already filled, but we have an Alaskan bush ministry that was part of the program this year. We've already got a student going for that. So let me know if you have any questions. I'll be here through Wednesday evening. I leave Thursday morning for some other ministry assignments. There'll be some other folks, though, at the BMM table over in the Milton Center.
Yeah.
For the rest of the conference. So appreciate that. Thanks, guys. Some of you are very familiar to me, your faces anyways. Had the opportunity to be in class with you, so I look forward to getting to know all of you a little bit better here. So keep that in mind. Keep that brochure. Pass it on to a friend if you don't need it. We'd love to.
I've got a few extras in my office too.
We'd love to serve you guys and just expose you to what's going on with BMM. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Appreciate you stopping in.
Appreciate it.
Looking forward to seeing you around. All right. So, yeah, if you didn't get a brochure, it looks like everybody's got one. I've got a few in my office as well. All right, Brother Sean Haney, you spoke last night. Some of these folks were there, some weren't. So why don't you take a couple minutes as well and just share about your opportunity.
Okay, well, we represent a ministry called Adelphos USA. We are a American branch office of a Chilean mission. Actually started 30 years ago in the country of Chile with some churches that were already nationalized, indigenized there that realized that the Great Commission is for everybody. And one thing that sometimes was forgotten in the planting of churches, at least my experience in Chile, was that we forgot to teach them that missions is actually part of the process until Jesus comes. And so we want to, but we're glad for that. And so we're kind of, you got to take the paradigm that we think of most often of American missions planting branch offices in other countries and just flip that completely on its head. But that gives us some unique opportunities. We would like you to think about that. If God is leading you into ministry and you feel like you'd like to be in partnership with the nationals that we have in different countries, that the Chilean Mission Board has in different countries, we would love to talk to you. For instance, some of you have heard, and faith grads, Jared and Kathleen Laux, are now in language school, preparing to go to our church planting team in Ciudad del Este in Paraguay, and to be a part of that ministry. We've got works in 13 different countries around the world, mostly Latin America, but we're also in the Philippines, we're in India, we're in Romania, and we're in Liberia. And we also work with church planting here in the United States. Last night at the meeting, I mentioned coming up here April 14th, we are sponsoring the first time that in the Midwest that the National Conference on Hispanic Outreach is meeting here in the Midwest. They usually meet in South Carolina and in Arizona, but I said, hey, there's Hispanics here in the Midwest too. And so we're having that conference. If Hispanic church planting in the United States is something that would interest you, I'd like to invite you to come to that conference. Again, Dr. Lounsborough has information on that, and it's even up on the missions board in Nettleton. And we'd like to see you with that. If you're a senior, I know this doesn't help you, but something that I'd like you to think about is hopefully next year in January during the Christmas break, we're trying to put together a missions trip, medical missions trip to the south of Chile. And we could use some people say, well, I'm not a medical person, but we need people to help with triage. We need people to help with counseling. We need other people, obviously bilingual would help, but that's not necessary. And we'll be in more communication as we start to put together some details for that as well. South of Chile, where the Mapuche, the indigenous peoples of Chile live, very discriminated against, not a lot of medical care available down there, even though Santiago has some of the best medical care in the world. The south of Chile has hardly anything. And so we want to help meet that need. So just some different things. I'm going to have a table right in the gymnasium area in the back. Would love to talk to you. We're trying to get here once a quarter to try to keep some of the relationships going, and we'd love to build more relationships with you all. And we've got a good start with some grads from Faith with us, and we want to keep that ball rolling and see many more. Not trying to rob from other good missions agencies, but to see many more come with us and be part of partnership with nationals in teamwork missions around the world.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Some of you heard that, but things slip through the cracks too, so it's good to hear it again. And yeah, if you have questions, I said on the monitor, see me, but I will probably end up channeling you to Brother Sean so he can give you more of the details. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Z, where are you in life? In school, working? What's your...
Yeah, I'm a junior in high school.
Right.
So.
Good, good. You homeschool, Christian school, public school?
Homeschool.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you guys on the road now quite a bit?
Not really at the moment. My dad's still working on his doctorate, so he wants to finish up those classes before he's traveling all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, so right now he's just working on planning churches for the future. So
I'm assuming you know the Stillwell clan pretty well, huh? Or at least getting to know them maybe?
they do. I haven't actually met them yet, but
Abby Stillwell actually works in this building down in Coastal. She's an admin assistant for the music department. And let's see. Is she the only still well around right now? on
Right now,
campus?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jake, Ben, and Rebecca, they're
Yeah.
all in different states now.
Yeah. Her dad has taught for years at the Trujillo seminary there. So, yeah. Hey, good. Well, let's have a word of prayer again. Thank the Lord for all this, and we'll get started in a little discussion. Father, thank you for the opportunities that we have heard, and we're just grateful that we have such access to so many ways that we can serve the Lord, and we know that the Spirit of God must work individually in each heart to communicate that which is in accordance with your will. And I just pray that as these students consider these opportunities and others, that you'd guide them and place them as the Lord of the harvest would want, and to bring about the fruit that you've intended. And I pray that our discussion today would also be encouraging and fruitful, and help us to think, help us to consider, help us to analyze, but always with the backdrop of the truth of your word as our guide. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so let's create a little scenario. You finish your program here and you graduate, so you walk across the platform and you receive your diploma. Everybody claps. Would it be correct to say that now you have become a professional? See some heads shaking no. Yeah, Caleb?
Well, I would say no. First, you'd have to define the term professional, what you mean by that. But second, being professional involves so much more than just book knowledge. It involves a lot of, involves experience, being able to know things, not just on a surface level to describe them, but being able to live in those things and see how they actually connect to real life.
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah, I just see a bunch of people that come back from a job outside of like college and stuff, and they come back saying, like, oh, we needed to know this about this job, or like, we spent too much time working on this, we needed more of this. So,
Okay, all right. Anybody else want to chime in? I purposely did not ask initially for a definition. That's coming. I think the best way to do that, rather than trying to make a phrase or a sentence, let's think of some elements that you would consider necessary in order to call someone a professional. I want you to think not just in terms of ministry, but in general. When you hear the word professional, what elements or qualifications or characteristics should come to mind? What is a professional? So I'll write them up on the board here.
Well, someone that's really good at what they do and usually have high respect of other people.
Okay, good at what you do, one word. Somebody has a
Skill.
okay? All right. Okay, what else?
Along with that skill normally goes knowledge.
Okay, knowledge. Tricia, you mentioned something else there in the latter part of your comment.
Usually has respect from other people.
Okay, I'm gonna use that word respect. I do think it plays a role. Okay. What else?
I think with respect, trusted. I don't know if that's kind of the same, but
It's related, but let's put it down. Trust. Right? Yeah.
Experience.
Yeah, and you mentioned experience in your comment too, yes. Let me ask you this. It used to be years ago, maybe before you were born, I don't remember when they changed this, but it used to be that in the Olympic Games, nobody who was a professional was allowed to compete. Everybody had to be, what's the other word?
Amateur.
An amateur. Some say amateur. Depends on where you're from, I think. An amateur. Okay? So how did they calculate the difference? between what constituted a professional and thus disqualified somebody from participating in the Olympic Games. That's all changed now. NBA plays, yeah.
Whether or not it's their job,
Okay, yeah,
they
and
paid for it.
yeah. There's one thing you guys didn't put on here, and maybe on purpose, but I'm going to write it down anyway, just for a talking point. That is pay, because anytime you talk about professionalism or the professional world, sooner or later that is going to come up. Now, just thinking about pay for a second, let's just camp on that for a moment. In ministry, do we make a difference between professionals and amateurs as it relates to pay? How?
Well, amateurs are usually less experienced, and when they do a job, usually people like they see that they haven't had a lot of experience, so they tend to give them a job, but because they might not do the right job, they don't want to pay them as much. Because when they know someone has a lot of experience, they know they're going to do the right job, and they'll pay more for that job.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Just thinking of in terms of like pastors, you will pay a pastor or typically a church will pay their pastor to preach Sunday after Sunday because they have that experience, that skill, that knowledge. But if someone fills in a pulpit for a day, like a church member, or someone teaches a Sunday school class, they aren't necessarily going to get paid because they aren't professional. You could say that's not their profession. But then again, that's not always the case because some pastors don't get paid by the church. Some missionaries don't get paid, and you got to find other ways to earn money. But
okay. Now, Z, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but you guys are just setting out in beginning, or getting ready to begin deputation, is right? Raising support. I'm assuming you haven't done that much yet, right? Just kind of cranking up toward that now. Yeah. So, would you consider Z's family, his parents, they've joined the mission, his dad's going to be teaching at the Trujillo Seminary. Would you consider him a professional at this point, or is he only a professional when he has raised his salary, his support, and has, begun actually engaging in teaching on the field? Or wouldn't you call him a professional at all? There's a third option. Yeah,
So
well,
professional almost makes it sound like they've arrived and like they're perfect at what they do. But like any person is always still growing in their knowledge and what they're learning.
okay.
So
All right, so Val, what you just introduced, and validly so, is a concept that's out there in some places, some scenarios. The idea that if somebody's a professional, that person has arrived. For instance, if you go to if you're going to have gallbladder surgery, I have a friend that's doing that right now, getting gallbladder surgery. You probably want to go to someone who, at least in your eyes, has kind of arrived. I mean, they know what they're doing. They're not going to slip up. They understand it. They know. Okay. All right. Good. Yeah.
If I could interject something here, again, a lot of times we place on that, ministry. We place terms like vocational, or full-time, or part-time, or volunteer as well. And if I could just, again, I'm thinking it's probably changed, but I remember when we originally started, we used to be with Baptist Mid Missions, and we're still very good friends with Baptist Mid Missions. When we started on our deputation, or now I guess the politically correct term is pre-field ministry.
They still call it deputation of missions.
They had full-time deputation, and they had part-time deputation. The only difference was, are you solely leaning on love offerings and support, or are you maintaining another job? And again, sometimes that created some interesting things, because I had a family of 5 when we were on deputation. I had to keep them supported, so I maintained working in a Christian school as a fine arts director and Bible teacher while we were on deputation. Now, I was still doing 40 to 45 meetings a year, raising support, and all of that. Some people who were full-time were only doing like 20 meetings a year, but they were full-time and I was part-time. So it's a complicated thing.
It is.
It's a
It is.
complicated thing.
And you just helped us by complicating it more, and that's my objective here.
Sorry, I didn't
No, you're contributing to my objective. Okay, there's a madness to my method. Okay, and you also what was the word that he just used that we often used in place of the word professional? Instead of saying a professional missionary, we say. Yeah, vocation. Full-time is fine, but that word vocational is a little bit more of a technical term that we tend to use when we're talking about somebody who is, devoting his life, being paid for, supported for doing his work. Right. Okay. So, and we may get to the notes. We may not. We'll get to another time. But this is a murky subject, and one of my reasons for bringing this up is just to show you that it's not black and white. It's not cut and dried. Are some of you familiar with John Piper's book, Brethren, We Are Not Professionals? Now, okay, I don't know if you remember much about it, how long it's been since you read it, but would you be in a position to kind of maybe summarize in one statement where he's going with that?
Yeah, kind of the idea of the book. It's written to pastors, specifically to pastors, but it would relate to other ministry leaders. But the whole point of the book is you look at a lawyer and they're professional, they're very formal, they have all these things that they need to do, they have this formula X, Y, Z. But pastors and ministry leaders aren't professionals. We aren't called to do this formula X, Y, Z. We're called to care for people and actually be involved in their lives and not just kind of be cold, calculating, and distant.
Okay. And that is part of where he's going. Okay. And I think there is something else we can add to that. That's good. Who else has read that? Probably, you're on the right track. I think that probably if you were to ask him and take a look at the book again, you might deduce that one of his main concerns is the expectation of people in ministry who have degrees and who have succeeded in a certain level of experience and notoriety as ministers of the gospel. And many of them, comparing themselves with other professionals in the world, have either consciously or subconsciously convinced themselves that they deserve the same status and respect and notoriety as other professionals. I think that's what Piper's after. I do not think that Piper is against the idea of education and preparation and resources and all the things that are important to prepare somebody for a lifelong of effective ministry. Okay? I just started a book that that was recommended to me recently, and I don't remember the full title. It's at home. I meant to bring it and forgot. But it's a book that it takes issue with a trend that the author believes is happening in your generation. Maybe some in mine too, but primarily in your generation. And that is a tendency to deprofessionalize the image of the ministry. Now, I'm not saying that you guys are embracing that. He's talking about a tendency that's out there. And what he's concerned about is the idea that, if we just love God and love Jesus and love others, then God's going to work through us. He's going to do great things and people are going to come to Christ. All of this formality, what your dad is planning to do in Peru, what I'm doing here, all this does is create stuffed shirt, academically minded, people that go out and do what for the Lord. We need people who are just on fire for God, and the professionalism that has been a part of previous generations is being decried among a lot of people in your generation. I don't know if you noticed that, maybe because of the circles that you have grown up in and been around, you haven't sensed that as much. But there are missionary movements out there that are pushing hard for that mentality. One of them is the church, the church planting movement that's out there. David Garrison has written a book on that subject, and the book that I'm reading actually quotes from him. And in fact, if you will bear with me for just a second, I'm going to pull up the Kindle version of that. They let you peek in and see a few pages. So let me pull that up on Amazon, and now, wouldn't you know it, I'm drawing a blank on the title of the book.
Should be able to search by author.
Speaking of blanks,
Oh, okay. Oh,
I just got this book. It's a red book. I can type in red book here and find it. I just had it up in my office about a half hour ago. Okay, well, you know something, if I look at my lists, just a second. I did order the book as a, I'm gonna try and find it for you. Some of these are baby gifts. Aha. No shortcut to success. All right, in fact, let's see if I can just pull it right up here. There it is. There it is. And so we'll take a look inside, and I want to show you in the beginning. I think it may even be in the preface of the book. See if I can blow that up a little bit for you. All right. Let me find some statements that he makes. No shortcut to success. Now, I'm just going to tell you, the guy that writes this and the guy that Mark Dever does the preface, he's with 9 Marks, and he's a pastor, and I'm not endorsing everything that these guys stand for, okay? They'd be broader evangelical. But the point he's making in this book is drawing my attention, okay? It's published by Crossway, which is a publisher that John Piper has often used, at least by and large in the past. Let me see if I can locate these quotes. All right. We're getting warm. Really, we are. Okay, here. Yinkai, architect of the widely practiced training for trainers, T4T, church planning methodology, blames his sense of professionalism for his decision not to share the gospel with a dying man. I had a chance, he says, but my professional mind thought this is not a good thing. In other words, what he's saying is, my professional mind and my reasoning skills overcame my spiritual impulse to witness to this guy. That's really what he's saying. That makes sense? As if there's some sort of dichotomy between a spiritual impulse to do something and intellectual reasoning. Okay? That's David Garrison. I mentioned him earlier, author of Church Planting Movements, How God is Redeeming a Lost World, writes, church planting is not rocket science, so don't leave it for the professionals. Everyone should be planting churches. I just want you to think that last phrase, is that really what the New Testament is teaching us, that everyone should be planting churches? Because the church planting movement is this movement that claims tens of thousands of churches being started in a brief period of time. I mean, some of you have read some of that in other classes. David Watson, principal designer of the disciple-making movement methodology, writes that professional leadership in the church has resulted in a reduction of those who feel qualified to minister. The net result is a weaker church, one that does not have the infrastructure to multiply, expand, and grow. Now, we heard Dr. Jim talking this morning, correctly so, about the diminishing number of pastors and missionaries. Everybody out there is crying out for more workers, Christian schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the answer of a lot of these people is we need to stop being so concerned about preparing people formally. I'm going to use that word instead of professionally, okay? We just need to find people who are willing to serve God and get them out there in the trenches preaching the gospel. If they know how to be saved, they know how to be a missionary. If they know the truth about salvation, then God can use them. We're wasting time and we're losing people. People can't afford education and all the resources that previous generations have said they have to have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So what do you think? What's your reaction to that?
If that's true, what are we doing here?
Oh, yeah? Good question. Either you or somebody spend a lot of money so you can you can finish up here. By the way, Z, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but she lives in Argentina. Latin America has a little bit of, I don't know yeah, but she's really a nice person overall. Good. Somebody else want to pipe in to that? Yeah.
You do see in the New Testament examples of Paul going back to churches after he's planted them, and appointing and training elders who can lead and guide those congregations. So there's a sense in which people who lead the people of God should be prepared and understand what it is that they're getting into, so that they're able to deal with problems when they come. I think I've heard of some people doing like pastoral almost degrees through their churches now, which I think is actually a very interesting way of doing it. And I'd say Bible college isn't the only way,
right?
But there does need to be some sort of training for people planning to go into the ministry, because there's a lot in the Bible, and if you can't bring it all together into a unified whole, you're going to have problems somewhere down the road.
Right. And what this book is talking about, and what I'm talking about, is not to say that if you don't go to a Bible college, you can't be adequately prepared for vocational ministry. I don't think anybody at this school would tell you that. Okay, Bible colleges, the Bible college movement, started by A.B. Simpson and others, has been a tool in the hands of God for many, many years, but it certainly is not the only way. One of the most effective pastors I knew in Brazil never went to Bible college. He was self-trained, he's self-ready, and he studied with his pastor as well, So the point of this book is not, that we have to go to a Bible college, a formal institution, in order to be adequately trained. The emphasis is on the adequately trained, however that's done. And there are other ways to do it. Yeah. And I think what he's battling against is this tendency to be sloppy and say, we just got to love God and love others as the two great commands, and we're ready to go. Yeah, Sean.
I think it creates that, especially that last quote, creates an unnecessary dichotomy too. Now, whether we want to call it professional leadership or equipped leadership or whatever, the whole idea of the leadership of the church is to equip the saints for ministry.
Yes.
It's not just the leaders that minister. The whole church should be ministering.
Yes.
And it's the leadership that I think creates you've got the professionals, so they're the ones that minister, and everybody else that just sits and watches the show.
Right.
So,
yeah, I think you're right. This is a huge subject. Let's take a few minutes and fill in some of these blanks. By the way, Val is on a week from Thursday. We're going to have a visitor here on Tuesday of next week. Val is on, just as a reminder to you guys in the class, she's doing number 62, which is, what's
Costly compassion.
it?
Costly compassion.
Costly compassion, number 62 in the book. It's on canvas there, but just remember you need to read that so you're prepared for discussion. All right, let's take a look at this issue of amateurization and professionalization. Some would use the word professionalism. I'm not going to make a big deal of which one. Couple of introductory thoughts in the notes. Letter A, Ralph Winter. Now, Ralph Winter is a name that you should know if you take missions history seriously. In the early 1900s, he helped at Fuller Seminary with Donald McGavran, and then he started the U.S. Center for World Missions, which is now called Frontier. And again, he would be much broader evangelical, but he did make some good contributions to the ability to study and prepare and find resources. The William Carey Library that some of you are familiar with, he helped to get that started as part of this ministry. Anyway, he is credited as being the first one, at least according to your author, to use the word amateurization in a missionary missions context. Okay. Um, so some of you have already mentioned short-term missions, right? The blossoming of missions trips in it started after World War II and just really took off in the 70s and 80s. That would all of that would be an example of amateur missions, because these are people going out to get experience, to serve in missions, but they would not be called vocational missionaries, fully trained missionaries. Okay, letter B, the student volunteer movement, huge in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Okay, and those of you who studied history of missions with us, remember how many times we would reference missionaries who were influenced somehow by the student volunteer movement? Yeah, I mean, it was huge. But what kind of an impact did it have in the big picture, with regard to how prepared someone, needed to be in order to go? A lot of people, even in the student volunteer movement, they were using the word volunteer in a little bit more technical sense, not just somebody getting up and going out to serve Jesus, but somebody that's willing to invest and become prepared. The missionaries that we studied who were influenced by the student volunteer movement were missionaries who, by and large, did formal preparation of some sort to be prepared to go. Okay. Letter C, short-term missions. We don't have to define that. Baptism and missions at least used to define short. I don't know about Adelphos, but it's hard to make a specific designation. They used to say if you were there for 1 or 2 years, they call it a short term. If you were there for at least a term, it'd be called full term. But definitions vary. There's a delicate balance. Letter A, number 2, letter A, between over preparation, which is, I don't know, I suppose it's possible. I would rather than speaking of over preparation, I would probably speak of misdirected preparation. I don't know that it's possible to over prepare if you're preparing in the right way, but you can prepare in ways that aren't really applicable to what you're doing, if that makes sense. We try to avoid that here at Faith. Sometimes you may find that hard to believe. But does this book have anything to do with what I'm going to do in the future? You ever ask yourself that question? A lot of times professors assign it because their experience tells them that this book will become important to you. Okay. Anyway, over preparation. It's an overemphasis on perceived qualifications. How do you know what genuine qualifications you need to serve in ministry? And that's a good question. Let me ask you this. The qualifications in 1 Timothy chapter 3 for a pastor, would you call those character qualifications, practical qualifications, combination? How do you view those? Yeah.
There's one practical qualification, which is able to teach, and then all the rest are character.
Okay. You could probably argue that given to hospitality might also involve practice because, it is an attitude, it's a character thing. But if someone's given to hospitality, he is actually engaging in it. So probably, yeah. Yeah, most of them, though, by and large, it's character qualities. Okay. By the way, Caleb, when you talk about Paul, at the end of his first journey, he is establishing pastors who are very young in the faith. Right? There's no way to argue against that. They're very young. Most of them probably Jews who already had a background in the scriptures that gives them the ability to teach, in a way that the Gentile new believers would not be able to do. But I also think that even in the early church, if I can use the word carefully, there's an evolution in the way that churches develop and prepare leaders. At the very beginning, it's much simpler. But Paul himself later on, probably in the 60s, writes to Timothy, and he's in addition to those qualifications in chapter 3, a lot of other things are said in that epistle regarding the nature of pastoral ministry. And so I think if you were to talk to Paul himself, he might tell you that early on, they did things in a certain way because the church was just starting, but perhaps later on, not so much. And I'm not going to die on that hill, but the fact is when the church first began, resources and methods and insight and experience and all that was not available. The Spirit of God was still very much leading the church. Okay, the church was like a very small child. It could walk, it could function, but as it grew, and it put some meat on those ministry bones. As people began to consider preparation for the work of the Lord. Anyway, just something to think about. Letter B, under preparation, is an overemphasis on, well, think of Matthew 9:38. What word would you put in there? Under preparation could be an overemphasis on what one word? People are dying and going to hell. We need to get workers out there. What's the word?
Urgency?
Go.
Urgency?
Urgency, exactly. I've even heard people say, you know, we gotta get more people on short-term missions trips because there are people dying and going to hell there, and they need to hear about Jesus. And the mentality, and innocently so, of those people is the reason for short-term missions trip is to get more people out there telling people about Jesus. Okay, now I'm not saying you can't do that on a short-term missions trip. I do not view the driving factor of a short-term missions trip as that. I view it as exposure, as an opportunity to see and learn, be challenged by the Lord for missions. That's what happened to you this summer. I mean, you came back transformed just having experienced what you did there on your trip. And others of you have experienced similar things and are going to. Okay? So, you know, do we say, why are you wasting 4 years of your life at Bible college when you could be out there serving? Now, some have tried to temper that. There's one institution I'm thinking of right now that is promoting an idea that kind of tries to address this. And that is, even when students are in their freshman, sophomore year, they can already apply to a mission agency. And then they start actually beginning the process of missionary activity while they're in college. So that by the time they graduate from college, they're ready to go to the field. Now, I'm not against that idea in principle. I do, there is a red flag that kind of goes up. I'm a little cautious about the maturity and the preparation of a person, you know, to be prepared. Some are. In fact, when I was in college, and you probably too, it was much more common to get your bachelor's, graduate, and go to the field. Start deputation, go to the field. Your dad's working on a doctorate, you know, before he goes to the field. I can't argue against that. I've been in the same boat. So I just wait a little longer. I was 62 when I finished mine. Hardly here, hardly. So, you know, is he losing precious time by doing that when he could be there winning souls to Christ in the field? That's the objection that's often given to so-called professionalism. Okay? Letter C, a suggestion that's often been given is become a missionary candidate before finishing college. That's what I just mentioned, before finishing college. As you can see, we're not going to get through all this, but that's okay. Number 3, Ralph Winter, we mentioned earlier, versus John Piper. Are they really at odds with each other? Winter says, letter A, missionaries are insufficiently trained for full-time service. He was concerned about that. He looked at some of the fruit of the, you know, some of the revivals that so-called were going on, or evangelistic, you know, things, and he was concerned about the shallowness of many of these people who, you know, were starting churches and so on. B, Piper says missionaries perceive themselves as professionals and demand a status as such, perceive themselves. So they're really not at odds with each other. I mean, look at John Piper's ministry. Look at the professionalism, but look at the books, the website, the church itself. He's got a school. Piper's got a school. So to accuse him of saying that he's against professional or, you know, or formal training, and again, I'm not a Piper. I don't embrace everything he stands for. But I am defending him on this point. I don't think that he's being anti-professional. Okay? All right, then there's a comparison there. You can see that, and we're not going to get into that. Let me try to finish this up in 4 minutes here. Tensions that can exist between professionalism and amateurism. One is theological. And the question is, how deep do we need to go before we're ready to serve? Okay? How much theological training do you need to pursue in order to be adequately prepared to be responsible as a missionary? That's not an easy question to answer. Letter B, organizational. You know, the difference between just going out, maybe from your church, as opposed to joining a mission agency or something like that, you know, where there are more resources, more formal things. Letter C, recruitment. You know, what kind of people should we be recruiting? Should we be going after people who have, you know, good formal preparation of some sort? Or are we just going to look for people who say, I'm willing to serve Jesus. I'm willing to go. Good, come on board. We're taking you with us. Letter D, training. It's kind of redundant there. Training, how much training does a person, and what kind of training? E, support. How much support? I know a missionary family just met recently that is purposely going on very little support to the country where they're serving because they feel that it'll enable them better to identify with the people there. Others say, no, you need to be adequately supported so that you have the resources, so on and so forth. F is strategy. What kind of, is it important that we, what about the strategic planning stuff that's been around now for a few decades? Is that really necessary, or do we just go with a burden for people and trust God to use us? See, well, there's probably an answer there in the middle somewhere. And by the way, let me just say this to you. Be careful that you and I'll speak to me too, don't become critical of people who are a little bit less or more than we are on this subject. You know what I'm saying? Because God does use all kinds of people. Issues to be faced, A, the relationship between the church and agency and the missionary, letter A. Church, agency, missionary. There's a triad there of cooperation. And that plays into this whole issue of strategy and professionalization. B, the careful management of money. If you're being supported by someone, how does that person know that you're making good stewardship with regard to your money, to their money? Preparation does help in that area. See the difference between voluntarism, T-A-R-ism, and volunteerism, T-E-E-R. I don't know if you've ever even heard before reading this, the word voluntarism. Voluntarism, he uses in the sense of people that are willing to go, but when they go, they prepare themselves. They go as they're called to the church, the Spirit of God. Volunteerism is people saying, I'm going to go, and they just go. Some of them go on their own. More than the Moravians did a lot of this. They didn't make a big deal of the centrality of the local church. They just packed their bags and went. And so he makes a distinction between that. D, the opportunities and dangers of global partnerships. One of the vulnerabilities of a lack of formal preparation of some sort, formal wherever, is that you may find yourself prey for groups that sound really good and show some really neat results that appear very biblical, but who have some underlying theological issues that really make a difference in how they understand the scriptures. Okay, that's a big one right there. E, the balance between long-term and short-term missions. We talked about that. There's a balance. So I would just say this to you in wrapping up. Yeah, that clock's coming as fast. Nobody has the precise answer to this because there isn't one point on the continuum that's right for everybody. Does that make sense? There are people who can do better with less formal preparation. There are others that require more. Everybody's wired differently. What I would say to you is, number one, never sacrifice the value of adequate preparation on the altar of urgency. Jesus was here for 33 and a half-ish years, and he only spent 3 of them in public ministry. Did he waste the others? God just is not in a hurry. On the other hand, don't swing the pendulum the other way and say, God's going to do what he's going to do in time, and so, I don't have to. Both of those extremes can be very dangerous. And so, you're here because you believe God has brought you here and that this preparation is going to be helpful. I'm here because I also believe that. I've devoted my life to college, Bible college ministry. We were in Brazil before we came here, teaching in a Bible school there. So I am not afraid of the word professionalism. I usually avoid the term when I'm talking about ministry in our circles, just because I know that people often process that in a way that I don't think is correct. So vocational ministry might be a little more adequate in communicating. It takes the baggage of the word communication is different from the baggage that comes along with the word professionalism, if that makes sense. So if you do use the word professional or consider yourself a professional, just be careful that people know what you mean by it. All right. Thank you all. See, thanks for coming. Sean, joining us.